Chapter 5. A zombie, a shuffling undead husk with a taste for flesh. A ghoul, what have you. This is something to fear. This is something that will put goosebumps into your spine and make you not just run away in terror, but also convulse and weep with stress and anxiety for days, weeks, or even years later. Creatures that were once sentient, loving, caring beings of dignity in the image of the Creator, now turned into flesh-eating monsters. These frighten us because they are so devastatingly familiar to what should be warm and fuzzy, in spite of being dangerous and diseased. If a zombie bites you or kills you, then after death, your body will become one of the undead as well, and continue on the infection. No horror is quite as unfathomable as the horror of encountering a zombie in close quarters, particularly if the zombie used to be someone you could relate to, used to be someone you loved, or someone you cared about. The zombie infection, initiated by Sanfor and Cormaxo at the seasonal festival, spread quite rapidly. And within the course of the day, the city had descended into chaos. People were getting infected and joining a growing legion of undead that the elven military could not effectively contain. The city guardsmen, by the morning of the third day, had reached a point of such desperation that they were preemptively killing people clearly infected by the zombie disease who had not yet died and turned undead. "No, please, I don't want to die," screamed one child in the custody of the guardsmen. He had been bitten by his sister after she got attacked by zombies earlier that day and been killed and turned on the spot. The child was in otherwise fine health and could have lasted a day or two before eventually succumbing to the poison transmitted by the zombie bite. But the guard holding him knew, like his comrades also did, that the city needed to contain the infection. So he nonetheless threw the child into a large sealed cage filled with other people who were infected with the zombie plague who had not yet died and turned undead. These people were pleading and screaming and saying that they felt fine and that it wasn't right to kill them while they were still living elves. The guardsmen, however, had no choice but to ignore them and continued stuffing infected people into that cage all throughout the day. When the cage got full, they filled it with a magical acid gas that disintegrated those inside. This was actually a very effective strategy to stem the spread of the zombie plague. It was ruthless, but it worked to save lives by preventing scenarios where sickened elves were turning into zombies in crowds of otherwise healthy ones. The city probably would eventually have to undergo a full evacuation, but the more time they could buy, the better. The elven military had no idea where the necromantic plague came from. There were suspicions that it was related to the recent breakout from the city jail, but that could not be confirmed. There were reported sightings of elves that could have been the fugitive escapees at the festival where the first zombie sightings occurred. But even if those reports were true, that wasn't conclusive evidence that they had anything to do with this. The elven military was focusing less on the why and the causal investigation, and more on their task at hand, preventing a full-scale apocalypse. In what was actually considered the most likely good scenario, the elven city in the trees would be fully evacuated, and magical fire spells would be used to destroy the zombies remaining inside. The military was so desperate to find some kind of detect magic spell that could ensure only uninfected people were evacuated. If such a spell could not be devised, it was discussed whether the city would need to be destroyed with all the people inside. The elven military, before this outbreak occurred, had been focusing their efforts on fighting the slave rebellion in the outer regions of the land. The slave rebels were mostly orcs and goblins, but they were led by a vicious black-skinned human who charged with his men into battle, overcome with a bloodlust they'd never seen before, an urge of destructiveness that even surpassed that of the zombies in their cannibalistic hunger. The army had no choice but to spread itself thin, because both the slave rebellion and the undead horde could be existential threats to their nation if not quashed by any means necessary. Resources were running out, and other nations were reluctant to send aid as of now, but if things got desperate enough, anything was possible. The military hoped this would not be the case, though, for things to get so desperate that the broader world itself felt a need to be involved. For things to get so desperate, the threat was to all nations. The military men and the elves in general hoped and prayed to their elven gods that the crisis on all fronts could finally end and that civilization and day-to-day life could be restored. Chilvmar, the grand architect of the potion that started all the chaos and destruction, at least on the zombie front, watched these goings-on through a crystal ball as he drank sugary cocktails on a beach far, far away. In a safe, sunny, secure, tropical nation, he already had hundreds of offers for his zombie plague potion, and even the lowest offer was more than enough money for him to completely retire and live the remainder of his extremely long elven life in relative luxury. Banfus, the sorcerer mercenary, was on the beach with him, lounging on a bamboo chair. Banfus stared up at the sky and imagined the clouds contracting and expanding like diaphragms, letting air in and out in an organic rhythm. The two had grown close since they started working together, homosexually close. "What do you think will happen?" Banfus asked. "Will they get the zombies under control without having to destroy the city?" "Who cares? Where there's a will, there's a way. I'm not trying to destroy the world, you know. The point's been proven. People know what this is capable of," said Childmar. "It's a game changer. The cat's out of the bag." "And the fact that they can take specimens isn't going to hurt the market for your potion?" asked Banfus. "Clearly not. They won't be able to make the potion from a specimen. They'll need the source. Sure, someone can lock up one of the zombies in a cage and keep it in a dungeon somewhere until needed, but that's not nearly as effective as having a potion you can sneak somewhere undetected and slip in someone's drink. This is retirement, Banfus. I don't care about these specifics anymore. We'll sell the potion to the highest bidder and spend the rest of our lives here, relaxing on the beach, resting here for thousands of years," Childmar said, closing his eyes. "Us elves lead such long lives and work so hard for so long. It's nice to give up at some point and basically experience a peaceful, happy eternity. Not literally, but practically. Eternity is lived in the moment, you know. Eternity is a short-term feeling. Life's a big sandwich, and I'm just hitting the second half, and it's the most delicious thing ever. It certainly is one big sandwich. One big, delightful sandwich, albeit cut into pieces." Childmar put his hand on Banfus's shoulder and felt a burst of warmth, which was part spiritual, part sexual, and part familial. In that moment, he was in heaven forever. All his hard work and striving was so that he could finally relax and experience a perfect moment and live in that perfect moment for the rest of his life. He also smiled because he thought the death and suffering of all those other people he didn't care about was humorous. Their pain and premature death was amusing to him and added a layer of lightheartedness and interconnectedness to his supremely happy ending. Banfus felt similarly, but not as strongly. Banfus in general was more laid back and fickle. Banfus just wanted to enjoy his life one way or another in each moment. Banfus wanted to constantly be distracted by something entertaining or interesting, and more or less he had that joy in his life. Perhaps nothing mattered, or was it that everything mattered? Banfus floated onto a magical throne in a magical throne room in the sky, where he was king, at least in the corner of his eye. No one could enter this throne room but him, and he was safe. Sometimes he tried to let people in, but they could not cross the magical threshold. This room was both in his head and more real than anything he ever saw, touched, or heard. Happiness was something Banfus already had. He was simply killing time until his life ended, because he needed something to occupy his time. Banfus was living the life of a retiree the moment he first realized no one would ever love him, just the idea of him. If no one ever loved him, there would be no worries. For these two elven partners in crime, the game of life had been won.